Hello, everyone. My name's Alex,
And I'm Joe.
and today we will be reviewing Keoma.
Yeah, Keoma, released in 1976, directed by Enzo G. Castellari, starring Franco Nero of Django fame and Woody Strode, the slave George. So Keoma is usually considered to be the last true spaghetti Western ever released. It takes place in a Western town in post-Civil War America, where Keoma, a half-Native American and half-white man, returns to his hometown to find it ravaged with a plague run by his three half-brothers and a man named Caldwell. He saves a pregnant woman who is doomed to work with other plague victims in the mine, and he works with his father, who always loved him more than his brothers, and former family slave George, to smuggle medicine into the town and save the townsfolk. After a showdown with Caldwell and his men, Caldwell kills his father, and the brothers kill Caldwell in return. They intend to try Keoma for his crimes, but Keoma is released by the witch, and he takes them all down in the final scene. And then he rides off to the sunset as the woman gives birth, actually dies in childbirth. So, Alex, what's your initial thought on this movie, Keoma?
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite movies. That doesn't mean it's going to get a perfect score. I just love so much about it. Obviously, it's lacking in a lot of areas. There's just so much at play in the film. I think, at times it can be considered kind of like a psychedelic Twilight Western. There's like echoing screams, slow motion, a trippy soundtrack that's not typical of this kind of movie. And then, of course, a witch, which every psychedelic, I guess, has to have. And then there's, really deep-rooted ties with the Bible as well, that really are not too obvious. But the more you kind of see this movie and think about it, it becomes obvious. And the script is like poetry. There's so many quotable lines, and it's just like very simple lines that mean a lot. I think Franco Nero is just badass. He just kills it as Keoma. He's that rogue underdog, comes back from the war. He's looking for a reason for all of his actions in life. It's a super deep film, and I think they nailed it.
Yeah. So my initial thought, actually, the first time I watched it, was that it was just another Western and kind of confusing to follow and kind of underwhelming. But watching it the second time and thinking about more like the meanings and the micro conflicts going on, and each character's kind of story, you just uncover a lot, and it's very deep, like you said, and psychedelic. Subtly psychedelic. It's not like there's gonna be a waving screen or anything, but yeah, it's definitely, the soundtrack plays a big part in it being trippy.
Yeah, you got a really good point. It's not like overtly psychedelic. It's just very spiritual and like a lot of like really deep questions, and then they slow it down, and yeah, just very cool. It's not typical at all, and I think it's Enzo Castellari and Franco Nero coming together to form this like mastermind, where they've talked about this in interviews, where they kind of just fed off each other and came up with this like really original concept based on the Western.
Yeah. So going to overarching themes. So it's kind of funny you mentioned that about the Western, because at face value, you could take it as a simple revenge tale, right? Like he kills his brothers and the town is being overrun. But when you start to interpret the deeper themes about it, like for one of the things that I was wondering was Keoma's motivation to even help the townsfolk. Because he's a vagabond. He talks to his dad, and the dad's like, "Oh, what's your reason to live?" or something to that effect. He said he's looking for his reason to live. He hasn't found it yet, but in the meantime, he's just gonna be a vagabond. So why does this guy want to help the townspeople? And my interpretation of that, it's goes back to his upbringing with his brothers. So you have the three, I guess, pure blood brothers, whatever you want to call them, just all white, in those times. And he was a half Native American, kind of a bastard child. And his experience being oppressed I feel like gave him some empathy towards other people being oppressed. And I think it's really that simple. Like he just did not like to see people going through what he went through. So that's his motivation to, free these townspeople from Caldwell and his brothers who, they kind of represent like just the bad guys, oppressors, classic oppressors. Um, yeah, that's my main theme. And then the witch, representing death. It's kind of vague to me still what her role is, but she definitely shows up often. It's hard to tell if she's like a real person that just shows up or just a figment of his imagination because it kind of goes back and forth. But I think she represents death and him trying to escape it and show her up and you know all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and she prompts him a lot with questions too. So like to guide him, in a lot of ways. Like, why are you here? In the beginning, and just continually asking questions. It's not really like telling him what to do, which again goes back to that like she's like a spirit guide almost, and to your point, like she's more than death, I think.
Yeah, I was trying to think like is she his conscience, but then she kind of manifests herself in the female lead's character near the end there. So it's just very, very obscure and ambiguous, which makes it a good movie.
Yeah, there's definitely a ton going on. And just to talk a little bit more about like the religious references, at one point, the brothers kind of string him up on that wheel outside of the bar, and everyone kind of goes in and parties. And then a bit later on, he's down from that wheel, and they're all kind of shocked. Where did he go? How did he get down from here? And then, of course, the whole like fighting with your brothers thing is very reminiscent of the parable of the prodigal son. Trying to get that respect of their father and how they kind of did the right thing the whole time, and the father still likes kind of the one who went on his own path and kind of went all rowdy, but then came back kind of like with those lessons of the world and actually is a better person for it. And then the last thing that you brought up was like the pregnant woman, and this need to protect this child, this unborn child. And there's just so much in Keoma's head to like, at all costs, we have to protect this pregnant woman. And I think he's even asked directly, like, why? And he doesn't really have an answer, but it's all about that, like the future.
Yeah, his motivation for acting is a big question mark in this movie. I still don't know the answer, but he's asked why he does stuff, and it doesn't seem to be a reason. Another theme real quick I want to touch on was freedom, which we might get into later when we're talking about the quotes. But one thing that I found really interesting with George, the slave, like just near the beginning when we first meet him, he's talking about his freedom, and when he was a slave, all he dreamed about was being free. And then he said once he got it, and this was a quote from the movie, he realized what it was worth, so he just went to drinking. And freedom is a big part of the whole movie. Like, what does it mean to be free? Like, if you're not a slave but you're still oppressed, are you free? Like, is it, if you're not a slave but have no direction, like, is it worth it? So very, very interesting thing there that deserves more exploration.
Yeah, and I think just quickly, I'm building on that. Why he's fighting to free these kind of people with the plague and everything like that. But to your point, it's like freedom from fear seems to be what he's trying to give these people. Like not the actual just being in like chains or locked up, but it's like not to fear this this leader of the town who's kind of like an evil guy.
Yeah, no, for sure. Freedom it can be interpreted many different ways. So I think Keoma definitely explores some of those ways.
Yep.
So what are your favorite scene? What's your favorite scene, Alex? Let's get into that.
Yeah, so it's probably one of the more cheesy kind of scenes, but when Keoma goes into the saloon with the pregnant woman that he kind of rescues, nobody in the saloon wants her there, so he has to defend her and let the saloon also know that he's not someone to mess with. So everyone's kind of nervous, like get her out of here. And he's just like, get the woman a drink, stuff like that. And they keep kind of messing with him. And then at one point, he punches one guy across the face, kind of like a Superman punch. And right after he knocks the guy down with the punch, he immediately points to the last guy there that's like ready to challenge him, and the guy just backs down.
I
And
love
it's
it.
just like so classic badass. And throughout that fight scene, there's like slow motion people falling over. It's just really weird and cool, and fits kind of like the era and everything. So I love that scene. And then anything with Woody Strode and his bow and arrow was badass too.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this is a Western. So those saloon fights are a big part of it, the movie. And
Yes.
over the top, like, hero just beating up everyone.
Yep.
My favorite scene is right near the end, where he takes down his brothers. Just, we had just finished seeing the big fight with Caldwell and his men, and then the scene you were talking about where he's strung up on the wheel and escapes. And then the scene where he's taking down his brothers, it's dawn, so the lighting is really cool, and then it's in that abandoned barn or something, and just lots of really cool color play and shadow play, and there's no music, which is interesting for Keoma especially. And the sound is just the woman giving birth, so very deep and just visually pleasing and just kind of tense and very badass. I loved it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot leading up to that scene, and you're right. I didn't think about that till now, about like kind of the silence and strategy around it.
So real quick before we talk about our favorite quotes, what do you think about the music? It's very controversial.
Yeah, it's very I guess polarizing. A lot of people either really hate it or love it. I haven't talked to anybody or seen anything where someone was like, I'm indifferent, right? Because it's like operatic kind of music in a Western. I love it. I think it's so cool. I think it's so original, and it's like a romantic, for lack of a better word. It really just kind of like takes you deep into Keoma's soul, like why he's doing things, because the lyrics of the music like talks you through the scene, which again some people hate. I just think it's cool. I love it.
I know. I see where people are saying they hate it, but I think people just hate it because it's different. I mean,
Yeah.
when I think about Keoma, I just cannot separate the music from the movie.
Yes.
Like some movies, you like don't even think about the score, but this one, like, and it's good. Like the music, it's pretty much like one or two songs the entire time with the lyrics and the different singers, but it just kind of puts you in that movie world, and it's really awesome. The
Yeah.
first time, yeah, sure, maybe it's a little weird, but it grows up. It grew on me a lot, and I think it's integral to this, just the movie itself.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. When I think about the movie, anytime, any scene or anything, I'll hear the soundtrack in my head.
Cool. So let's do our favorite quotes, and I'll start with mine. I like the final quote because I feel like it ties the whole movie together. Where he just took down his brothers, the woman just gave birth and died in childbirth, and the witch is holding the baby. And I forget what she says exactly, but she says, what will I do, or what will he do? He will die about the baby. And Keoma on his horse turns around and says, he can't die. And you know why? Because he's free. A man who's free never dies. And then he rides off. And it's a deep line, and it makes you think about the whole movie, like what it means. And um, it's just delivered in a badass way.
Yeah.
So
Rides into the sunset kind of thing. It is the best line. Yeah, it's my favorite line too. I think it's, to your point, encapsulates the whole movie. And I was hard pressed to think of another one that I liked more than that. But it's actually at the very beginning, talking to the witch, the same exact kind of interaction, but at the beginning of the movie. And she asks him why he's there, and he just says, I need to find out who I am to give the simplest of my actions a reason. Which is like, again, two sentences, but like so deep, encapsulates the entire movie as well.
Right.
Like he's there to like kind of come to terms with his dad and his family and the town to figure it all out. Like what is he living for? Is that the reason why he's like saving this baby who he doesn't know? I mean, it's yeah, they're both really just great lines.
Yeah, no, I forgot about that one. That's really good. And his father has a big role in the movie too, like just kind of overseeing everything. And like you said, the son's kind of fighting, even if it's subconsciously, for his approval. And um, yeah, really good character. He has lots of good lines too. You know, not really great quote like a one liner, but just kind of his general. I think character is really great.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing we didn't really talk about yet is the flashback scenes where like Keoma will be sitting there with his dad and he'll be thinking, and then you'll see them in the frame, and then like a young Keoma like run up to his dad or fight his brothers like within the same kind of shot. So it's like this really kind of, again, like psychedelic thing where he's like seeing himself while being in the shot of like a memory that kind of defines a relationship. And it happens a few times where like at first when you're watching it, you're like, is this happening like present day with them, or is this like a flashback? You know, it takes a minute. Once you figure it out, it's like, oh, that's really cool. You know, not a lot of movies would like take that risk.
That's why I think the second viewing definitely is beneficial, because the first time, you can figure out what's happening eventually, but when you understand it from the get-go, it makes the movie go a lot better. And um, yeah, it's a lot better the second time for sure.
Totally. So yeah, Joe, why don't we score this thing?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Um, okay. So the first question is it a good movie, which we're defining as watchability? Well, the first category is watchability. And just because the first time was so tough, I have to give it a 6. It gets better definitely with more viewings, but if you just sit down and watch this without really thinking about it, you're not going to have a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. I
You have
gave
a
it.
decent time. It's entertaining, but
Yeah.
uh,
There's a lot to get over. That's why I gave it a 7, because there are hurdles for sure. Um, Still though, it's got like, some like 40 to 50% of it's like a cool factor. The other like, 60 to 50% is, or 50 to 60% is like a, what the hell is going on?
right.
You know, like that.
That
Go ahead.
the last or the near last scene where he fights Caldwell's men, people talk about that scene in westerns as like one of the greater choreographed fight scenes in Western history. So it's a good scene and some really good stunts too.
Yeah,
Like battling the two horses.
that part is awesome when he's riding the two horses together. Yeah. And then there's a part where he like, leans to the side of one horse to avoid them. And then
Yeah.
one part where he's being dragged um,
Oh yeah.
on the horse with his hands bound, and he's like through a puddle and thrown and everything. And it's like, this is before special effects and all that. This is like,
This was 1976. He's like, you get your ass
right.
in.
Right. Yeah.
I hope you.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible watching. You're right. That's an incredible scene.
So what about the artistic score? Enjoyment,
Yeah.
artistic point of view.
I went ahead. I gave it a full on 10. I think this is the only 10 I've given anything so far, but I just thought what they did together, and it's not even just like director, it's like director and actor together. I think both their heads came together and brought this like piece of art to life.
I agree. I give it a 9, and I'm actually gonna say the music did help bump it up because, yeah, the first time it's weird, but most great art is weird the first time someone
Yeah.
hears it, and you just cannot separate the music from the movie, and it really like has an effect like transporting you into that world. And yeah, it's just really great.
Now, Joe, date night score.
Oh man, it depends on your date. What poor soul you're dragging along to watch this. So I gave it a 4 because I'm thinking if I brought a woman over to my house, like, hey, you want to watch Keoma? It's a pretty good movie, and then she'd be like, what the hell is it? So
Yeah, I gave it a 5, which is probably being very generous and having a lot of faith that you know everyone is tolerant of such like an artistic kind of out there
Yeah.
film.
Especially if this is a first time viewing with the date, the music will be like, you should be like, what are we even watching?
Yeah, you're right. You just gotta hope like there's enough alcohol or whatever before watching it to be able to rationalize that music being in a movie. Right?
Just ask your date if they trust you.
Yeah, exactly. They might not after the movie, but
Yeah.
now what about your overall score?
I'm gonna give it an 8. I think it deserves an 8.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it just is so deep. I feel like there's much more to even dissect from the movie. So, there's just a lot there and a lot of things to think about.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like we're scratching the surface. And I give it an 8 as well, which is an overall score of 8. I just think, to your point, there's just so much going on, but it's not like overbearing, like the script is simple, like we were talking about. There'll be like simple lines, and like the first time you see it, you don't really think much of it. And then like maybe a day or two later, you're like, wait a second. And you kind of think about it and you're like, it's kind of brilliant. It's one of those movies that hits you like, wow, this is brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, there's the main conflict between Caldwell and the town, and then like Keoma versus his brothers and the father, and then George too, the slave. He is a
Yeah.
very role and how he plays into it, and then the woman, death. So lots of characters and interactions that come together.
Caldwell is like almost like a B character, it's like he's like the ultimate bad guy. And like I think you see him like 3 different scenes like the whole movie. It's like there's just a lot of cool ways that they kind of filmed it and wrote the movie. But overall,
kind of more like the bad guy, but he's not really like like you said, prominent as time character.
Yeah, the conflict is like the family conflict, and then kind of like an internal thing, right? He's wondering what the hell he's doing, why, what's his reasons are, etc. But
Keoma versus himself. That's why it's called Keoma.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a great movie. I highly recommend it. I think it's totally overlooked. I don't think anyone really talks about this movie, but I think they should.
Yeah, it's not that popular. What the people that do talk about it highly.
Yeah, and they're like extreme Western and enthusiasts. So I think it needs to like break out of that and get to some people who may not watch Westerns all the time but want to give this a chance, because I think it's a brilliant movie.
Yeah. Well, if there's nothing else, I think we're done here.
Say any last words or anything?
Man who's free never dies.
I think we just end it with that then. Awesome.